95% of crypto investors fail because of this. Yep, it's our own brain that's the culprit. It's not the whales manipulating the price that keeps us from succeeding. It's our own thinking, or rather our cognitive biases, that push us to make poor decisions. And everyone has these, no matter how smart, logical, or experienced you are. It's part of our human condition. But the good news is that these biases are very well known, and you can avoid them if you're able to spot them and know how to resist them. So today, let's explore 10 different cognitive biases that we all face. I'll give examples of each one and discuss how to avoid them. I also want to give a shout out to DeFi Edge because it's his Twitter thread that inspired this video. I'll leave a link down below in case you want to check it out. Anyways, the first type of cognitive bias is called unit bias. This is where people would rather own a whole unit of something rather than a fraction of it. A great example is if you feel better about owning 10,000 of some meme coin rather than 1/10 of a Bitcoin. The problem with this is that owning a large quantity of something may make you feel good, but that says nothing about the underlying value or growth potential of that coin. So if Bitcoin goes up 10% while the meme coin only goes up 2%, then your 1/10 of a Bitcoin would have made you more money after all. The point here is to not just look at the raw price of a coin and how many you can buy. You gotta factor in things like their market cap and make a projection of how much that could grow in the future. Next up, number 2 is called anchoring bias. This is where we put too much importance on the first piece of info that we learn about a coin or project. Like, let's say that we discover Sol after it already rocketed 3x. So you may be thinking, dang, I missed out on the rocket ship. It went up too much already. So you end up not buying it. But then it rockets 10x more on top of that. So you missed out on all those gains, and it turns out you weren't even that late when you first discovered it. This has happened to me so many times before, thinking I'm too late because I discovered a project after it had already rocketed. The right approach here is to evaluate it based on its future potential, not on its past behavior. As for our third bias, it is the infamous confirmation bias. This is where we only look for info that tells us what we want to hear. An example of this is closing our ears and screaming FUD when we hear something that goes against our favorite project. Cardano is an absolute joke of a project. Another example is if we only follow influencers who tell us what we want to hear and we block the ones that we disagree with. This gets dangerous because what we want to hear is not always the truth.
We met while studying at Jordan University of Science and Technology.
Oh, interesting. Like just the other day, I was reading that science is used to make bombs.
I mean, sometimes it is indeed FUD, but not always. So you have to be open-minded and willing to do your own independent research to tell one from the other. The point here is to not get married to your investments and to really strive to get to the truth, which can only help you make better investment decisions. Now, number 4 is also a popular one. It's called the sunk cost fallacy. This is where we hold on to losing positions just because we've already invested so much time, money, or effort in it, even if the costs outweigh the benefits. A common example is if we hold a coin through a bear market and we're like, dang, it's down so much already. Let's just hold on to it until it recovers.
I'm squeezing it. Hey, I squeezed so hard it went into my hand.
What if we sell that coin and buy something else that's more promising and recovers even faster? That would be the more financially savvy move, instead of just saying, oh well, I've waited so long and invested so much that I'm gonna ride with it. My point here is that you have to constantly reconsider the opportunity cost in order to make the best decisions. Now, before we get to my 5th bias, a quick shout out to our video sponsors, AAX. They are a crypto exchange that offers spot and futures trading to over 2 million users worldwide. But what really sets them apart is their new features and promotions they're offering. Like, they recently enabled deposits of wrapped Ether on the Polygon network, so you can deposit funds with much lower fees than regular Ether. You can also withdraw up to 2 BTC worth of crypto without going through KYC. They're also offering a wide range of bonuses, like up to 50 USDT for new users and up to 100 USDT if you trade their vanilla contracts. So that's a total of 160 USDT if you are a new user and trade those contracts. And lastly, they have their unboxing gifts campaign, where if you buy a certain amount of crypto, you can potentially win awesome rewards such as an iPhone or a fancy camera. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, then go check them out. Use my link below. All right, back to number 5, which would be loss aversion. This is the common psychological behavior where we feel more pain from losing than we feel pleasure from winning or gaining something. A great example of this comes from my own experience. I encountered some scam or rug pull ICOs back in 2017, so I vowed never to do token sales again, because I hated that feeling and wanted to avoid rugs at all costs. But if I was more open-minded like my buddy and bought some in 2019/2020, then I would have gotten massive returns without even facing that many rug pulls. So the point here is that we should always ask ourselves, what's the worst thing that could happen if we took this action? And what's a realistic probability of that coming true? After all, sometimes the risk-reward calculus is better than we think, and it's our loss aversion that's irrationally keeping us from doing something. But anyways, cognitive bias number 6 would be recency bias. This is where we put more weight on recent information/events than they deserve. Like, let's say we noticed that in the past few months, some on-chain or TA metric flashed, and then Bitcoin proceeded to rocket right afterwards. So you're like, okay, it just happened again, so I'm gonna bet big this time. It worked all the previous times, so why not this time? But then it proceeds to fail and Bitcoin dumps instead, and you get wrecked. This is actually basic statistics. Like, if we're in a casino and we notice a roulette table has been hitting a long string of greens, then we think that it's a greater odd of being green next, even though that's definitely not the case. So my point here is that we need to zoom out and look at more complete data to make sure that we're actually building a solid statistical case rather than cherry picking data to inform our views. Now, as for number 7, that would be survivorship bias. This is where we only study the winners or survivors and try to copy them to recreate their success, even though it may have been blind luck. Like, we all hear about someone buying a few $1,000s worth of meme coins and becoming a multi-millionaire in a few months.
I just spent all my money on Dogecoin.
But we don't hear about the thousands of people who bought meme coins and lost a ton of money. So it's a fool's game to try to copy the winners without studying the losers as well. But the problem here is that sometimes it's harder to notice or get information about the losers, and that's why this bias is so prevalent. Moving on, bias number 8 would be the authority bias. This is simple. It's our tendency to follow the leader or authority figure. For example, if you're like, wow, this analyst has been around since 2015 and they have 1 million followers on Twitter, so they must be super legit and have a great track record. But then you follow their trading calls and it turns out wrong and gets you wrecked. Like Plan B, for example. So many people followed his stock to flow model and swore by his crazy 120k Bitcoin by December prediction. Point is, you gotta realize that authority figures get it wrong too. So don't take their word as gospel. And also be sure to ask yourself, what is their motivation or incentives to say what they're saying? Because oftentimes, we need to take their word with a grain of salt and come to our own decisions instead. As for bias number 9, that would be our outcome bias. This is where you judge your decision based on the final outcome that happened, rather than separating the quality of your decision from the eventual outcome. One example is if you FOMO into a random meme coin and then it goes 10x. That is amazing for you, but a terrible decision. The reason why is because if you do that 9 more times, it may all fail and get you losses instead. So when evaluating the result, you gotta account for randomness or variance that could explain it. Last but not least, for our 10th bias, it's called herd mentality. This is where we like to follow and copy what everyone else is doing. Like, oh wow, everyone is buying these NFT collections, so I gotta do it too. But this type of FOMO behavior could lead you to buy the top in many instances. So you really want to do your own clear-headed analysis rather than get sucked in by emotion too much. But now that we've identified these common biases, the question becomes, how do we resist them? Well, one thing you can do is to print out a checklist of these 10 biases along with all the other ones out there and go through them every time you want to make some investment decision, like whether or not to buy some coin you just heard about or something like that. After you refer to it enough times, it will become more muscle memory. The next thing you could do is to create a trading or investing framework for yourself. And you set your own rules, like in what situations do you buy something, and in what situations do you avoid or wait. And just follow that to a T, so it's not left up to your gut feeling on any given day. But of course you can adjust that over time. Like if you notice a string of underperformance, you can review your system and make changes as need be. No system is perfect after all, and it's all about iterating to make it work for you. And related to that, it's just keeping a journal of good and bad moves to see what you can learn from in the past. Now these tips are all habits and tactics that disciplined investors use. So honestly, we should all do these if we want to maximize our returns over the long haul. By the way, if you want to become a better investor, then one thing you gotta learn is how to hedge. And in this video, I explain everything you gotta know about hedging in crypto. Or you can watch this video where I explain why I do more fundamental analysis these days instead of technical analysis. Hope this was helpful. I'll see you on the next time, and cheers.